Joe Rogan. He always says that at the beginning of the
Yeah.
interviews.
That's how I learned.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he does a good job. Okay. I'll just open it up. Okay. I'm Ryan Brown, and this is the Unvarnished podcast. And tonight we're in the studio of Greg Mortenson in Harlem. And this is exciting because I don't get to see you enough. You're one of my favorite people. And we go back till, 2005? Is that when we first met? It was 2004. Was it earlier?
Yeah, probably 2004. Yeah.
And you're from Utah, St. George, so we would not have known each other from there. You were living. What brought you to Utah County when you came? Because I had the studio above, or with Gary Price, the sculptor, and I think that's the first time we met. You came to that studio, right?
Oh yeah.
And,
yeah, that was a cool studio.
Yeah, we talked about. You were thinking about going to the GCA. GCA was brand new, I think, and it probably just coming up. I don't even think it had a full year at that point. Did it? Water Street was kind of morphing into.
No,
GCA.
it wasn't GCA. It was Water Street. GCA
It was still Water Street.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, GCA didn't come till 2006.
That's right. Okay. So we were talking about. I had gone to Florence, to the Florence Academy for just 6 months, 2 trimesters. And I think you were just looking for that kind of study. We were talking about where to go. And those were really, the 2 main options at that time, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I said, go to Florence, and you went to the GCA.
Yeah.
Water Street, came to New York, both of which are brilliant options either way. But before that, they had a school for a little bit in Utah with William Whitaker and Patrick DeVonis.
Yeah.
Which we both went to for a little. I think you probably stuck with it a little bit longer than me, right?
Yeah. So I went there. Yeah, we studied with both of them, and then I ended up leaving there and going to New York. 2 years later. So I was there for 2006.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think they called it the Carl Block Academy, and it lasted maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, something.
Because it didn't start right away in 2004. They started talking about it in 2004, and then 2005, I think it really took off.
Yeah.
And that was at the time, I thought, going to be the great answer for me, because I knew I wanted to go back to Florence, but I couldn't afford it, and the idea of moving internationally again seemed kind of impossible. So I thought this magical solution was going to solve all my problems and help me be great. It just didn't end up being what I thought it. I guess it just didn't evolve. It didn't quite get on its feet. It ended up being a series of classes more than kind of really digging into a full academic rigor, right? And part of it was just the location. They didn't really have a solid building, studio, so then I went to Florence, back to the Florence Academy. You went to the GCA in its first year, right?
Yeah.
You're one of the OGs of the GCA.
Yeah.
And how long did you stay there?
I was there for 4 years, and then I painted at Jacob's Collins' studio. Jacob started the GCA, and then I painted with him for another 2 years. We would just share a studio, or share a model at his studio every morning, and yeah.
We should maybe tell people that this is not how you always sound. That you're practicing a voice for an upcoming role in a Scorsese movie. Is
yeah,
that right?
Yeah. Or I'm trying to be the next Batman.
That's right.
Yeah. I got sick. I've been sick for like a week. It's not COVID, right?
Yeah.
My wife first my daughter got sick, and then my wife got sick, and then I got it.
Then you got it. Yeah. As things go in a family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife really wanted to have COVID just so she could be done with it and just like Yeah. So it's not this game of Russian roulette,
Yeah.
It's just like I out of the way. But so she got tested like every day because she works at Elmhurst Hospital. So
Yeah.
every day she'd go, must have been wrong. And then she'd go and get tested and must have been wrong. And I got it. I got tested and I didn't have it either.
Yeah. Well, yeah, normal sicknesses didn't go away just because COVID's around.
Yeah. But it was nice because we were so like nervous about germs for 2 years that people just weren't getting sick.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I got sick as well, a week and a half ago. Luckily it lasted maybe a day, but same thing. I was like, just let it be COVID, and let me be over this. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy times. It's I hadn't been sick before that for probably almost 2 years.
Yeah, it's been hard. I've made it worse on everyone. Like everyone has to take care of me because I'm so not used to being sick. And so,
well, when men get sick, we really get sick. When women get sick, I don't know how they do it, but they still go on. We shut down. We are not as strong.
It's true.
It really is true. I still think it's that my wife doesn't truly get as sick as I get when I get sick. But it's probably that she's just not as big of a pansy.
I'm a total wuss. And my wife she went to work. And I decided not to paint. She's like, I was just like,
I couldn't possibly hold that brush.
I know. It was just, my hands were so weak. But she was mad at me that I have that option.
I can't reach the level of concentration necessary to do the kind of work I do.
Dude, I am a baby. Like I really think I couldn't. It was just like thinking about painting all day. It was like too much. Like
just get a damp cloth and
yeah,
lay back in bed.
It's true.
Honey, can you bring me my slippers? Oh man, yeah. So you stayed for 4 years, and then did you get married in that time while you were still a student, or did that come after?
I proposed to my wife on my graduation trip with her.
Okay.
Like we went to Seattle Oregon. We went to Oregon and I proposed over there. So I just graduated. Felt like, I think I was afraid to date anyone serious while I was an art student because it was like, you can't make a living as an artist. Like, I didn't want to put anyone through that.
Yeah.
And then I thought like things were starting to go well for me. And so
nice.
I thought, maybe I can get married.
I mean, right out of school, right? I mean, you had success pretty quickly with a lot of your work through was it the Portrait Society, or you were doing a lot of self-portraits, or what was it first that kind of started to take off for you?
Well, I guess I finished school, and when I chose to study at Grand Central, I was looking at different options. One of them was going on and getting my MFA, and I remember thinking, or like reading some terrible statistic that like 3% of MFA graduates, recipients are still working in art 5 years after they graduate. So 3% still working 5 years after.
Yeah.
And that's pretty abysmal.
Right.
But I noticed coming to the GCA that Water Street was all I had to go off of before, but there was a lot of success. So people would go on to have good careers. I don't know what the percentage was, but nonetheless, there was still a lot of people that weren't. They're going into the world with armed with the same amount of knowledge, but some people were really taking off, and some people were bartending or,
Yeah.
And just not finding the time to paint because they're doing other things.
Yeah, they had to make a living. They had to figure that out.
And so I kind of looked right at graduation, then I proposed and was getting married, and I was like, oh, well, what can I do? And I looked at people that had gone before me, their resumes, and just said, okay, what did they do to be successful that other people didn't? And I looked at Patty Watwood or Michael Grimaldi, and just Dan Thompson, and I said, okay, well they and they all had similar things in common, and it was like they were a lot of them were teaching, or they were winning art competitions. They were in galleries of note.
Yeah.
And they were being published in books or magazines. And I was like, well, I'll just do that.
Yeah.
But, it's like, you can't just do that.
Yeah.
And so I looked at, Patty Watwood had just been in the Portrait Society competition. And so I was like, well, I'll do a painting for this. Entered that. And I got into that, and then...
That was that 2009 or 10?
That was... so I graduated from the GCA in 2010.
Okay.
And then I got married in 2010, and then I actually worked for Jeff Koons for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I just got married, and I had some these commissions, and I had some money, so it was like we went on 2 honeymoons.
Yeah.
And then we came home off the honeymoon, and I realized I had no money, and I was like, oh, I'm married now. This is terrible, and I can't be a broke artist, and so I started working for Jeff Koons, and I remember thinking, well, I'll just do this for a little bit, and then get my feet on the ground, and start my own career, and I think I was like super cocky, like I'm better than everyone here or something, But then I would look at their stuff, like everyone else that had worked there, and they were so good, like so good. Like they'd show me their portfolios, and it was just like, really good stuff. And but I noticed there, like people were either just starting or they'd been there for 10 years.
Yeah.
And I could see it'd be easy to do that as well.
Just kind of plant there, and
because it was cool,
have that regular paycheck.
Yeah. It was, they paid well there, and it was like everyone was super cool. Everyone was way cooler than me. They dressed cool, and the guys were handsome, the girls were pretty, and it was just like they should have made a reality TV show out of it, because everyone, and Jay-Z and Beyonce were coming in. Greg Fokker, what's his name?
Ben Stiller.
Ben Stiller, he came through. So you're seeing all these celebrities come through, and it's like I could see, well, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I also just wasn't painting like I should have.
Yeah. Was it any? You remind me. I might be misremembering this, but was there? Did we have a conversation once where you were talking about it kind of being a soul crushing thing at some point? Jeff Koons is selling things for $35 million and making mountains of money, and you're never really there. It's such a different based on atelier academic training, where every effort you put into is self-development towards you trying to become the best artist you can be, and the idea of somebody else touching your work is I mean, you know, other than like a teacher that might come around and critique it, is so not even a part of the conversation, not even an idea that would cross your mind. And then you go to this world of contemporary art where it's almost like buying an Armani suit, where Armani doesn't touch it. It just has his name on it. And Jeff Koons doesn't really touch the work. He just runs the factory. And at some point, the juxtaposition of those two worlds, was that at all soul crushing? Because I've heard also other artists argue the point that Jeff Koons has done a lot for the representational art world because he employs representational painters, right? But the frustration from a representational painter side is he's making all the money, I'm doing all the work. The only way he's successful is by hiring people who can do what he can't do, and that can be, to me, that would be somewhat soul crushing. But what was your experience? How did you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I don't begrudge him for being a savvy businessman and you know, creating. I mean, he created his name and so I don't begrudge him the success. I the soul crushing part for me was just like working 40 hours a week for him. That was 40 hours a week that I wasn't creating my own stuff. You know. And,
so it wasn't necessarily the juxtaposition of the two worlds, because they just are two very different worlds. Like you said, you don't necessarily have to be begrudging that other people are successful in other ways. It's just not the world that you had spent all this time developing your skills towards, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of a different world.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I just wanted to invest in myself a little bit more, I guess.
Yeah.
But as it happened, I had put, you know, going. I kind of went on a tangent there, from where I was going with the, you know, sowing those seeds, from looking at where those before me had the paths that they had taken, you know, and with those, you know, so I had started entering competitions, and I won some competitions. I won like a self-portrait competition through, what was that?
American Artist?
So yeah, I was an American artist, but there was that Texas, the international. It was a Texas salon, an international salon in Texas.
I think I remember.
The Greenhouse
Gallery
or something. Yeah. I won a competition there with one of my self portraits, and I got into the Portrait Society, and then from those wins, I started checking off that list that I had noticed on successful artists, because then galleries started reaching out to me, because I was published in magazines for having won those and been part of those competitions, and so galleries started reaching out to me.
Yeah.
And then once galleries started reaching out to me, you know, then I'm selling my stuff, and then I remember being offended that Jacob hadn't asked me to teach, and I was painting with him every day, you know, because I only worked at Jeff Koons for like 4 months. It wasn't very long. Right. I stopped there, and then I went and started painting at Jacob's.
Yeah. And
I remember thinking, I wonder why he hasn't asked me to come teach. And then I think I taught a workshop in Utah. I came back and so I missed a week of the pose with him, and I came back and he's like, "Oh, how'd your workshop go?" He's like, "Oh, I didn't know you were interested in teaching. Why don't you come teach at the GCA?"
Yeah.
And so then I went and taught a workshop or I started teaching a class at the GCA.
Yeah.
And so like one by one, just by kind of setting the dominoes, set the dominoes in action, I started checking off my checklist.
Yeah.
And, you know, kind of following the footsteps of other artists. And then eventually those same footsteps were my own footsteps.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a similar pattern that a lot of people follow, and teaching can be not just incredibly useful as a way to supplement your income as an artist, but as a further development course to refine your way of thinking about procedural elements, how to explain those things. You get to stay surrounded by the mentality and the level of excellence that you came to expect in school, and the conversation and the youthful excitement that exists in those communities. So for so many reasons, it's useful, and I think that's, to a large degree, why a lot of people go that route. I mean, it brings a little bit of stability, and you get to retain your community.
Yeah.
And you've done that for a long time. You've taught workshops in a number of places, including at my school in Utah a couple of times. But you've taught all over. So I know you to be a brilliant teacher on top of being a great painter. With COVID and whatnot, that's kind of thrown a wrench in the mix. But are you back, or do you have plans to be back at the GCA teaching anytime soon?
Yeah, I last year I didn't teach just because I was basically teaching my kids. They were here. Being homeschooled, basically. I mean, they were online, but like, I had to make sure that they were online,
Right?
Which is kind of fun because I would just sit in here and paint. And my daughter she was pretty self-sufficient, so I had her in her room in her class, and then I basically did kindergarten again because I would sit here and Jude would be at his desk, and I would just listen to his class all day.
Yeah.
And but yeah, so last year I didn't teach at all because weren't they going to be in school,
Yeah.
and but I started.
And your wife works full time, right? She's a social worker.
Social worker.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I started again this year, which is nice. I just teach 1 day a week.
Nice.
And but it is nice. Everything that you said about like just being around the youth and everyone is so talented there.
Yeah.
Right. And so I have to go and look at these beautiful drawings and trying to find ways to make them better.
Yeah.
And there's just some amazing artists there, and which makes it that much easier to come and find ways to fix my own, clunky work, and because just seeing the precision with which they're working makes it easier here.
Yeah, a lot of your critiques can just be a pat on the back. You're doing fine. Just keep going.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny, I find myself just giving myself the same critiques I give the students. Well, of course you're not going to do that. Why are you doing that?
Yeah. I found myself doing the same thing. Making a mistake, and then I just talked to 3 different students about that. What is wrong with me? Why am I doing this now? Yeah, it's a good system of checks and balances for yourself. And like you said, people are getting better faster, and it just forces you to keep raising your game and reassessing and pushing. And there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of talent, but there's also a lot of teachers beyond just the students. There's a lot of people that teach there that are now kind of finding their own ways, bringing their own bend to the environment that I think can act as something very expanding. Okay, cool. Yeah, so beyond that, what... So okay, I want to get back to kind of like this history with you started to find success. You started teaching at the GCA. You started to have some demand for workshops. For you, I think that your self-portraits really kind of launched because you did a number of them. And that brought quite a bit of attention, didn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were all very unique. They were all obviously well painted, but design-wise, they were really cool. And I know you were going, or when you were going to the GCA, you were doing design work on the side to help pay for that, right? You were doing graphic design. And how do you think that plays into or played into compositional styles or how you think about picture making, how you put images together? Do you think that had any impact on helping you kind of figure that out?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I really enjoyed graphic design. Just like I love just looking like at beautiful letters or something, a well crafted letter, and just like the form of that, and I mean, it definitely influences my work.
Yeah,
and
all that design experience.
Yeah.
I'm just reminded. I'm looking at this portrait behind you. Unless you want to talk about graphic design some more, would you want to talk about your time in Haiti? What year was that? Because that also, not only was it amazing that you went and from a humanitarian standpoint, what you were able to do there, which you could share with us if you want, but also some of the paintings that came out of that seemed to be somewhat pivotal for you in some of the attention it brought, and the sort of impactful nature of the painting. It became, to me, is one of those rare opportunities where a work of art goes beyond simple beauty. It goes beyond basic portraiture, and there was something more meaningful than the art itself. There was a theme, something that you recorded, a humanity to that went beyond just a straightforward portrait of a nice model, right? Could you just kind of like walk us through that experience?
Yeah. So, back in 2010, I just got married, like we had discussed, and that 2010 was when they had that devastating earthquake down in Haiti, and so one of my buddies from high school was he had gone back there and was working with this orphanage, and they had been in the big city, had been relocated to the actual structure of the orphanage that they had been in had crumbled, and so they moved out and just into the countryside and were living in like just tents in literal cow pasture. And he had my friend from high school had he was working for a philanthropist and went down with X amount of money, basically given the assignment of go and see what good you can do.
Yeah.
And so he went down there and found this orphanage or children's school, because it wasn't just orphans. It was like there was just so much devastation there that many of the parents were, they had lost their homes, they'd lost their jobs, they were unable to provide for their children, and so they would drop them off at the children's home so that they could be fed and while they're getting their lives back together. And so it wasn't just orphans, hence the children's home. And but he he was down there for several months, and then he built him a latrine first, because there was no running water, no electricity. He built him dormitories for everyone to live in, and then he started building schools for him. And because he had this great heart, and he was always researching that kind of self-sustaining building or ways of building that you could just take from the land, and that had high earthquake ratings and for third world countries.
Yeah.
And so that's actually how he got the job, was he was kind of well versed in that. And so they start building up these buildings. He calls me and my group of high school friends, and he's like, "Hey, you guys got to come down and just see this and come help out, and it'll change your life." And so we all went down, helped him, and I didn't go down with the idea of like doing a series.
Sure.
But I would just sit down and draw someone, and man, Haitians are just so beautiful. Like they're just kind of a beautiful people. Like they're, everyone's athletic, and it's a bunch of Adonises, and so I was in painter's heaven. Yeah. Just doing these little sketches, right, and
models
drawings
everywhere.
Yeah, but I later went back to teach art classes, and I had another friend that taught, or he was a doctor, and he would go down and do basically Doctors Without Borders type things, where he would teach other doctors. He would help patients, but then he would also teach clinics to doctors. So that, because he was a neurologist and specialized in epilepsy, and he would teach his particular brand of neurology to them. And but while he was there, he started a school with some of the other dads that were down there that wanted to create a better life for their kids. And so I went and taught at his school as well. And then just through both of those trips, I noticed that I had a lot of drawings and sketches and painted sketches and photos, and I had just seen so much healing from my first visit in 2010 to my second was in 2013, and I mean, because it was terrible, that first trip. Like, I'd never seen such mass depression. Like there was no one had a job. The government, the Capitol building had crumbled in the earthquake, and so the hospitals had crumbled. The sanitary divisions, like everything had just stopped, and it was just like, you needed help. There was no one to turn to help, and it was like it was in a bad state, and they pulled through, and it was like they, not only just like the Haitian people in general, but like those little kids in that children's home, they were just like, despite it all, they were just so resilient and happy, and they were just like kids playing soccer, and I guess I wanted to kind of depict that just triumph of the human spirit that I saw there, and that was kind of where I went with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that came through in the paintings because, I mean, obviously they were beautifully executed, but there was a palpable sentiment to it that I think people would feel even if they didn't know maybe the narrative behind it. Somehow the paintings were infused with this humanity that. Yeah, it kind of showed that strength and resilience, and of course, just the natural beauty of the people, and to me that you kind of came at a time very early on when it was still pretty early when this kind of like high degree of execution was relatively new. I mean, it just started to come back. I mean, you had Water Street with Michael Grimaldi and Ted Minoff and Patty Watwood and I think Julia Aristides was there, and so they were kind of like that, just the previous generation right before us, and then you came out doing this high level of work. It was still relatively new, but then you added a new spin to it, which was, beyond portraiture. It was painting the human spirit, and I think that I mean, for me it was impactful. I think that it kind of taught me there's something more that we can dive into and discover. I was talking to Peter Trippi earlier, just about thematically what painters follow and painting current themes. He said, he hasn't seen any paintings of, maybe January 6th or some of the women's marches or, any of the, significant movements in our society or significant events in our society. Of course, there's been plenty of portraits with masks, but I think that's something you did very well, but in a timeless way, was painted an event that didn't necessarily paint all the rubble in an obvious way behind them, but painted the resilience. It painted the sort of the heroic nature of overcoming all of the devastation, and I think that's something that a lot of academic painters could maybe look at and aspire to, trying to infuse their work with a little bit more meaning and narrative and purpose, right? Something beyond just a well-executed portrait. So, that's my long-winded praise of what you did. There's nothing to say to that. So after that was 2010 to 2013, and since then, you've done some work, for the LDS Church. You've done a lot more figure work, commissions, and now what? Pandemic kind of shut things down teaching-wise. You're back teaching, and what's the plan? What's the plan going forward with where you're at? Where do you feel like you're at in your career? What do you? How would you kind of self-assess where you want to go next and what you want to do?
So I kind of feel like right now, like I'm really enjoying the paintings I'm doing. Like I'm probably having more fun now than I've ever had. Doing the religious paintings has been. It's pretty great.
Yeah.
Like I'm currently working on it's a 10 or 9 figure painting, 100 by 63 inches, and it's fun to do that.
Yeah.
Right. It's the paintings that I've loved are kind of all those 19th century and 16th, 17th century paintings of all those religious scenes that those are the paintings I've always looked at.
Yeah.
and the multi-figural compositions and so it's fun to be painting now the paintings that brought me into it,
Right.
into painting. I've also started doing this Western series. I live in New York City, but I grew up on a ranch.
Yeah.
And every summer, I go home to kind of put my little country in my city kids, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. And I've been doing these little paintings. I actually haven't even posted any of them just because it was so outside of my my brand, I guess. I was like, oh, I'll eventually do something with these. But I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah.
Like I'm doing this painting now of my son, and he's wearing, I went home and I found my old Spurs. So I put them in my Spurs and my old hat.
Yeah.
And I'm painting him. Well, I go home every summer to kind of recreate the childhood that I have.
Yeah.
And so I'm making him live my childhood while simultaneously vicariously living through his childhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm like, this painting I'm doing right now is kind of celebrating that. Like,
yeah.
And
and you were saying, I remember you telling me once, I think we had a conversation, where you were talking about, you were thinking about doing Western stuff, and you're like, it's in me. You go back and you start being around the animals, and you remember like how much you know about the behavior of animals and how they react and how they move, and it's not something that living in New York that's a constant thought process, but it's in you, it's in your upbringing, and so it's kind of a natural. With the Western market being so big, it seems like a natural, subject matter for someone like you, with someone with your background, because it's part of you. It's who you are. It's your history, and you have the access to it. You're going back every year and roping cattle. I don't know if you're roping cattle, but you're riding horses, and you're in that environment, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm actually doing that this fall, or spring rather, with my sister. We're gonna bring in the cattle, so I'm gonna do a full cattle drive.
Yeah. I seen Mark Maggiore, who I think a lot of people know Mark Maggiore's work, but he, the way he stages some of these. I mean, he does really dramatic paintings and multi-figure, and sometimes a whole group of horses, and I've seen him post images or videos of his like photo shoots, and it's like this movie set almost. I mean, he goes,
I've seen those.
and I think, it's kind of the way you have to do it. If you're wanting to make big, complex, elaborate things, you have to kind of pull that information together, and you have to stage it in a way that feels natural. And you couldn't bring horses individually into the studio and then have a herd of horses coming over a hillside,
Yeah.
And so I've thought about that, and just the brilliance of his process for pulling together information and putting images together, and I think he does a really good job of that. And so it sounds like you might kind of step into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. And I talked about those religious paintings being my childhood inspiration, but also like my house, it was covered with like Remington and Russell paintings, and that's, I still look at those when I go to my parents' house, and it's just like, that was the art that I loved, and I was
Are
drawn.
you talking about original Remington?
I wish I
paintings?
was. No, they're just prints.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. And you're balancing, coming from the academic background, maybe that, I'm just talking about Mark Maggiori's process a little bit. I mean, I only know, from what he posts. I don't want to assume too much, but you're coming from an academic background in a school and an environment that's very heavy on from life. And I know you've got models here, or I'm sorry, mannequins, and you've got clothing over here that set up like this that you're using to paint from. But you're also adding photography to the mix, right? And I know just from your design work that you're pretty technically savvy as well. Would you mind talking through like your use of different materials, your use of photography? Do you use like anything like Procreate or any of those tools to pull photos together, or paint on an iPad? Or I know a lot of people are doing that. It's a skill I'm so jealous of. I want to try to develop, because it seems like such a useful tool in terms of composing. Do you want to talk about that at all, or will you offend your New York friends by saying you use photography?
No, yeah, we could talk about that. I haven't used Procreate. Everyone says I should. It's just another thing that I need to learn.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't done that. I use Photoshop.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's just so many cool things you can do with it. Like I taught a workshop with Howard at Howard Lyons Studio.
Right.
And he's
kind of a wizard.
He's a master. And like, I keep pointing over here, like
everybody can see it.
Yeah.
I did film a little bit of it.
But yeah, so I have this 10 or 9 figure, maybe it's 10. I don't know. There's a lot of figures in there. This 9-figure composition, and I'd done my sketches of it, and I kind of knew exactly how I wanted it, and then I was talking to Howard about it, and he was, oh well, let's do something, and because I wanted certain, just for the design element, I wanted like this guy in the back to be the tallest, and I was like, but it doesn't really make sense perspectively.
Yeah.
And then he plugged it all. He made this little mock-up of it in some 3D program.
Yeah.
And then we
I don't even know the name of the programs all the time. He knows like 4 or 5 that he's a wizard at.
It's like Blender or something. This kind of sounds like a dating app.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was really cool to see, because like, and it was very crude, but he just had these like mannequins, and I was like, well, so I want this guy to be the tallest.
Yeah.
Would it work what if he was like 6'1" and this guy's 5'7"?
Yeah.
So we could like toy around with things like that, just so I could get the actual composition that I wanted that would make sense perspectively.
Yeah.
And so it's very helpful technology.
Yeah.
And so,
I was doing. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead.
And so like with this piece here, I've kind of like, it was inspired from just a photo that I took of my son at my sister's ranch. We were out riding. I had him. I had him in my cowboy hat and my old belt, and my we bought him some boots. I didn't have any boots, and actually he didn't have his spurs on in the photo, but he was in my old cowboy getup, and I took a picture of it. I liked, I was like, but he's also kind of like squinting into it, and it's a great photo. And I thought I should do a painting of that, but there were just elements of it that I needed to change.
Yeah.
And so the photo started as my launching point, and then but like in the photo, the little handkerchief that he has on, his scarf, it's really big and is covering up everything.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I made my little mannequin that I have over in the corner, to get the clothes exactly how I wanted.
Yeah.
The scarf only taking up as much real estate as I wanted it to take.
Yeah.
Then he wasn't wearing boots, and so, I mean, he wasn't wearing spurs in the photo. So I set up these. I got his boots, put the spurs on, and I did basically a still life of the boots.
Yeah.
And this painting actually started like that, where I painted the boots first, and I just had the boots, and then I did the shirt and the scarf, and I made a separate mannequin of just like the upper torso, and then I got to this, and also in the photo the belt, it's on all ski wampus, which just doesn't make sense for my final painting.
Yeah.
And so I made the mannequin so I could have the pants how I wanted them.
Yeah.
And then I had all these elements together, so I just set it up, my little mannequin I have over there.
Yeah.
To just get everything
Kind
exactly
of put
how
the
I wanted.
same angle of light on it. And, yeah.
And then, so I'll have animals in there, and I'll often go from photos that I have of the animals, but I'll also make, behind you I have all these little maquettes, and I'll often make the maquettes. I did it for a religious painting too, where I was doing it of sheep, of a what are they called, the shepherd,
yeah.
Sorry, the cold that I have also has kind of mentally slowed me down, and so I've found in this conversation, I'm struggling.
It's starting to fade at times.
Yeah, and I'm struggling just to find simple words like shepherd. It's like it's right there. It's just outside of my grasp. But yeah, so I made a little maquette of a shepherd and sheep, and then I get the lighting just like I want.
Yeah.
Which I did here, because this painting is so, like, what made me want to do it was the shadow that he was casting. There was something really that I liked about that, and so I want the animals, of course, have to be under the same sun.
Yeah.
And they weren't necessarily from the photos.
Right.
And so I made little maquettes of it, set it up. Well, what is this cast shadow? If this horse is behind it, what's the cast shadow going to look like on him? And so I changed just kind of conceptually. I'm using photographic reference, but then I'm inventing it because the light source on this one is coming this way, and so it's kind of I invent it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that to me feels very classical. A lot of the use of maquettes, the use of mannequins, the use of, photography obviously came around, mid 19th century, but was used widely by figure painters, which I think actually helped kind of explode the complexity of what they were doing. But they were using memory, imagination, probably primarily, right? Filling in the gaps that their imagination couldn't get to with whatever resources they needed, whether it was mannequins or maquettes or whatever. But to a large degree, just conceptualizing what was going to be there, and then having the skills based on all the training from life to actually execute it. So to me, that's kind of like a combination of all of history in terms of making painting. You're just kind of using the best of all the tools available, which is exciting. I think, especially, it's an argument I've made at the academies. I remember we had that conversation at the Hudson River School, I think 2008. Did you? Oh, you weren't. You were there 2007, but I don't think you went in 2008.
No, my sister got married in 2008.
That's right. I think we had a discussion up in the barn 2008 where Jacob led it, and gave a beautifully eloquent speech about not using photography, and then Will St. John followed it with another 20 minutes of just beautiful arguments for why you shouldn't use photography. And then, they say, do you throw it out to the crowd? Does anybody else feel like you should use photography? And I was like, I do. And I made my argument and set myself up as a pariah immediately. But yeah, I think there's just so many great tools, and especially in terms of maybe trying to help the academics who do the foundation of everything they're learning and developing is from life. Help kind of maybe expand the thinking into the usefulness of a lot of these tools, especially if you're going to be doing more complex things, figures outdoors, multi-figure paintings, multi-figure religious, historical, whatever paintings. I think those tools can be invaluable. I remember there's a Shishkin quote where, Ivan Shishkin, the Russian landscape painter who did phenomenal, complex landscapes, and I'm going to butcher it, but the basic essence of it is, when students ask him what the most important thing is to his work, he always says photography, and I think that's very telling of its usefulness to past masters, and speaks to maybe how we can do it today. I think people maybe rail against it a bit because a lot of paintings are made without maybe a lot of knowledge from life first, and so they naturally kind of mimic the weaknesses of photography. But when you have a foundation from life, I think you can use it as a tool to fill in a lot of the gaps, almost as a reminder or a guide of sorts. And using it like this, like everything that you're saying seems to be, again, the addition of every kind of problem solving that you could have, where the use of photography is one part of that. And I think you're doing it brilliantly. We can, I can even, maybe pan through some of these images later. We can, after we kind of wrap this up, maybe you can just stand in front of it, and you can tell us a little bit about it as you're kind of pointing it out, if you want. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to me, and the things that you're doing are, I feel a little bit isolated in Utah. With my work, I just kind of lock myself in my studio and go for it. But seeing this, it's just like, oh shit, there's so much I could learn from this if I were closer and I could see this more often. The reminders of how to control your edges. Your color is gorgeous. The flesh tones are beautiful. Your drawing's always impeccable. But how you're putting the image together and composing it is also really beautifully done. And again, it's a balance between, I don't feel like you're denying your time. I don't feel like you're trying to dress up your painting as something that was done 100 years ago or 400 years ago. You're within that tradition, certainly, but you don't feel like you're necessarily trying to escape your time. Would you say that that you feel like that, or do you feel like to some degree you are trying to fit in? You mimic Karl Bloch, or I don't know who. Would you say you're not necessarily concerned about divorcing yourself from your time?
I don't know. I mean, this one is, a historical painting, right?
Yeah.
And so, I wanted to fill of the time, but I'm always looking. I'm trying to paint my own paintings. I'm not trying to recreate a certain style, but I also am always looking to the old masters and saying like, why is this so good and mine's not that good? Like,
Yeah.
what did they do to
Right.
to solve this problem?
Right.
Like, and so
it's an emulation of execution or like you said, problem solving rather than stylistic choices.
yeah,
Which, again, is sort of a no-brainer for people. You're not necessarily trying to pretend you're in the 1830s making
Yeah.
a painting, but there's stuff that they did in the 1830s that was still incredibly valuable to figure out how to put a picture together.
yeah. I mean, one great thing about living in New York is that there's just so much inspiration.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I was working on that the one man show, the Haitian show. I kind of soaked in a lot of inspiration. At the time, there was a Sargent show at the Met.
Yeah.
So, and I went to that show, and I was just like, loved his like juicy, just beautiful, perfectly placed brushstrokes, and just like I was like, wow, that is like, this guy understands paint and why we paint in oil paint. I want to go home and I want to paint like Sargent and just get these juicy brushstrokes and then I'd come home and realize, oh, I don't know how to paint like Sargent.
Yeah.
But I would try,
Yeah.
And then,
But there's a freedom, there's a directness, there's something beyond just mimicry of a style. There's the way he was manipulating paint and using it as like this tangible material that you could learn from.
exactly. And then I went to a Tony Cernai had a one man show, and I went to his show, and it was like, if you've ever seen Tony's work in person, it's like there's none other like his. It's like it's I described going to his show as getting a massage for my eyeballs. It was just like he it's very highly finished, polished. You don't see any brush strokes,
Right.
but it also doesn't look like it's not photorealism.
Yeah.
It's
Because his understanding of edge work is such that it doesn't separate every single. If he's painting gumballs, for instance, it's not this photo sharp, representation of every single. It is, but it's also such a masterful handling of the edges where it actually feels comfortable. It's not jarring.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. There's it feels like you can step into it. Like a photo. I mean, I guess photographs can feel like that too, but like there does feel like you're looking at a photo and you feel that wall between you. But there's something about his that like that gumball painting in particular. I feel like I can pick up each one.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can touch, I could taste them, I could feel them, and but I remember leaving that show and thinking, wait a minute, no, I want to go home and I want to paint like Tony Cernai now.
Yeah.
and so like and you can see that in that series. There's kind of like this kind of fight between that where I try and push the flesh to be very finished, and then the backgrounds I'd loosen up to try and like to scratch that itch from these two master painters.
Right.
And so and Tony is obviously a contemporary painter, and so I was drawing from inspiration from the past and the future and or the present and the future, I guess. But yeah, that's
So in terms of how you're going about the religious work or anything, that's just a constant. It sounds like it's just a constant openness to trying new things out and responding constantly to things that you love, and then seeing if you can apply this principle or technique or whatever. And and that's exciting to me as well. I find I think recently I did just very, very recently, I did a bunch of landscape paintings the galleries were kind of asking for. And yeah, I kind of needed to get him done quickly, and probably fell into kind of a habit of the similar ways I've solved similar paintings in the past. And you know, after 4 or 5 of them, it feels a little bit mechanical to me, and somewhat unsatisfying. It almost feels like I'm, you know, a job that where I'm just kind of turning something out, and that's the feeling I want to get back to. Is that you know, half my day is spent just looking at books. Half my day is spent just kind of thinking through how could I describe this maybe a little bit differently, and how do I juxtapose the flesh against like this one, you know, the material of the Levi's or the flannel, or how would I explain those differently? Because, you know, you see a Sargent painting, and like burlap is burlap and silk is silk, and it's just there, you know, his manipulation of the material of paint, it was so the dexterity of it was so unbelievable. There's so much to learn, and there's so many different ways, like you say, you know, from the one standpoint of like Tony Sirenai, Anthony Waichulis, to which is, you know, small brushes and highly rendered, to gosh, Lermite, who, you know, is kind of brutal brush strokes, but everything feels right, and everything in between is exciting, and to be able to you know, I was just noticing when I was here, the painting that we keep talking about, and I'll definitely turn the camera on that here in a second, but painting we keep talking about is very much a Greg Mortenson. It's kind of something I'm used to, coloration, you know, your natural inclination for color. The way that you're handling the figures, the drawing, and this is just a study, just so people know that when we turn the camera on it, it's just a study, but it feels similar to what you're doing, very bold, and I think compositionally and in terms of complexity, a big step for you. But then there's a painting right behind it where the handling is really different than anything I've seen you do before. In this, you know, in the background, super organic and loose and broad brushstrokes, and they look like 2 different painters, and that's exciting to me. I mean, it may hurt branding, but the fact that you have the range, to me, is amazing. You know what I'm saying? You that you can kind of like experiment and alter your hand a little bit, is not as common as I would think maybe it could be. But that's, again, just coming in here and being inspired by that. Like, you know, it makes you immediately want to just run home and start painting. And like you, when you saw the Sargent show or Tony Sirenai, I come in here and I'm like, okay, I gotta go do that. I gotta try that. Which is really cool. Yeah, do you have anything else coming up? You got workshops? Do you want to like plug anything? You got a book, a music album, anything? Now with your raspy voice, you're going to start doing anything that you want to talk about?
I mean, I'm just painting.
Just painting.
I'm just painting. Yeah, yeah, I don't have anything really coming up. I'm sure there'll be
back to the GCA. I'm sure you'll start when things chill out a little bit, teaching a few more workshops around. And well, why don't we wrap that part of it up, and I can just grab the camera. Maybe we don't even need to cut. If you want to just, well, let's cut. I'll cut it and then grab the camera, and then you can talk about that. And if you want to, maybe even bring out that painting behind there and talk about the juxtaposition of your thoughts on how you're handling it. Or we can put it up here if you want, wherever the light's best. I'll get that set up.
Okay.
And thanks for having us, by the way.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, you're one of my favorite people. And I don't get to spend nearly as much time with you as I should. So thanks for having me.
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
I got to pee so bad. I've been drinking all day from my throat.
I'm going to keep that on. I'm not going to edit that out.
Okay. It's funny, like, it's been hard to, like, focus. Where do you want me? Right here?
Yeah, that's good. You can just talk about, if you want to talk about the composition or, how you put it together, or the idea behind it, whatever you want to say about it.
All right. So with this painting, it's the raising of the daughter of Jairus. And it started, the original concept started with just the Jesus and the daughter. And then I slowly added more. And well, I guess it started with these two, and then I had like kind of this flowing drapery kind of pulling the eye through. And then I kept adding more figures, because I was noticing in those 19th century paintings, they were using the figures not really to look at, but to pull your eye through. I mean, they're to look at, but I always get so caught up in each figure and portrait. I love the eye and the eyelash and everything, and I've done so many just portraits that's why we do them, for the portrait. Yeah. But you look at those multi-figural paintings, and so many of those beautifully rendered portraits are just a prop to pull your eye through, or to fill a dead spot right. in the painting.
Or add a life and character to the setting, to make the setting feel more natural.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, by saying them that they are props, they're not props. They're creating the story, but
they're like extras in a movie.
And to create the scene and make it feel real, like you're saying. So I set this up in here. I had a bed set up right here, and with the drapery flowing off of it, and then I never had these people here together, and so I taped off on the floor where each individual person was. And this is actually a mother-daughter combo. They were in one of my portrait classes, and so it was actually nice because they came and sat for me, and while I was drawing one, the other one would draw, and then I would critique their painting or drawing.
Oh, nice.
And so I got a lot of model time that way.
Yeah.
And kept them interested, and I have the statue back here, and I'd set the statue up over here over my shoulder as I was drawing. I'd say, okay, look over here, as if you're looking at Christ. Right. And then I would do the drawing, and then I'd realize, oh, it's off, and then I'd have to move it, but then I did, just one by one, I'd bring in a model, and kind of worked it all out. And I got my kids, put them in there. And it was really, I like the idea of putting them there, but it was really compositionally, like, my eye just wanted to go to this open spot, right, every time. And so I put this figure in to stop the eye. But it also, like, it brings in youth, it brings a whole nother narrative element to it, right? The same thing over here. This was just this hole that your eye, there's these two black holes that your eye just wanted to go to, and you put them there, and it just keeps you from going into those holes.
And it says, there's that Carl Bloch painting in the Sermon on the Mount where you have that child not paying attention, and he's like reaching for a butterfly. Yeah. And so there's that sort of real childlike response to what's going on that has somewhat of a childhood distraction element to it, which is really cool.
And I also like that it's, you know, just a different, you know, she's kind of has a different reaction than everyone. She's kind of cowering behind her dad and holding on to his drapery, and you know, just as a kid would do.
Yeah. And this, although it's circular, this is what, 36 by 36 roughly. This is going to be 63 by 100 tall.
Yeah.
So how do you alter, you know, when you have put so much effort into working this composition for this format, how then do you so dramatically alter the general format of the composition and then deal with the same sort of dynamic figure grouping?
So this was my original idea, right? And I kind of loved it. And it was designed very circular. It started out as just a square. But I worked so hard to get your eyes to move in a circular pattern through here. You know, these eyes are pulling you back to Christ. He's looking here. She's pulling you back. This hand's pulling you there. You know, that drapery, everything is pulling you through. That it just felt. I love Tondo paintings anyway, and I had worked so hard to get that circular filling through that I lopped off the edges and to make it circular. And I love that idea so much that when they the folks that commissioned it, when they approached me about changing, because they have this spot that they need in one of their temples that is 100 by 63, and they said, we love the idea of this scene there. Are you interested in changing the composition? And at first I said no, but then I like the idea of doing something that big anyway. And so it was always like first thing in the morning when I'd wake up and like a kid would be sleeping on my arm and I couldn't get up, and I would just you know, couldn't. I'd be in the morning in my bed, unable to get up, and just thinking, problem solving.
Right.
And then I kind of find the answer with this one with just architecture. I've kind of the arches in this architecture drawing that I've worked out kind of solve the problem for that. Yeah. And they kind of create kind of that same flow that those arches pull you back in. And because I was worried that, you know, this is where I want your eye. I spent so much time keeping your eye there.
Yeah.
That like I didn't want to just do something that was just like painted just so you didn't look there.
Yeah. And it's almost like creating a whole nother painting above this, right? You could end up making it so you still have the same figure connection in the lower portion of the painting, and then the top half of the painting just feels like this empty separate painting.
Yeah.
So it's a significant problem to deal with.
Yeah, yeah, and I was worried about that, and but I think I worked it out well, where it pulls you up and comes down, and I'm actually excited about the architecture that's worked in. It actually looks fun to paint.
Yeah.
And it actually opened it up a lot and created like this. There is a certain somberness to this, just with the darker values, and the new composition. Just there's a lot more light and it's open, and I as excited as I was about this Tondo, I'm more excited about the bigger one.
Yeah.
Thematically,
it seems to keep doing that go well also because it is it's like a bright moment. She's kind of coming, being raised from the dead, and so it seems like from a value standpoint that might fit thematically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. I'm going to turn the camera around. We'll just keep rolling if you want to talk about this, because I think it's really interesting, the juxtaposition of treatment that you've got going on between the two paintings.
All right, so this one is it's entitled "The Last Light on Gethsemane," and it is so we often see the Garden of Gethsemane paintings painted with Christ in anguish and bleeding from every pore and just the suffering, which the story depicts it as it is a moment of great suffering, but this is not that moment. This is the moment leading up to it. It's the last night on Gethsemane, and so the Garden of Gethsemane moment is kind of an exercise in isolation. Christ leaves the Last Supper with his apostles. They come to the garden. He leaves most of them behind, enters the garden with his beloved three, leaves them behind and just isolates, and goes into prayer. And with that, it is both in the garden and on the cross it talks about or there was a separation where Christ loses that comforting support from the Father, right? And on the cross he says, "Father, why hast thou forsaken me?" Right. And this is the last light on Gethsemane. As the sun is setting, that last light is representing that Father's love, that support, and so this is a moment before the sun sets, before that comforting spirit is cut off, and he has to bear the atonement and suffer our sins and our and all of our pains and whatnot, and that got really
well, from a thematic standpoint, it's interesting because a lot of times organizations like the LDS Church, they want things that are absolutely biblically written, and so this tends to be pre-narrative, pre-recorded narrative, and so it's interesting that they would catch that vision. That doesn't always happen. They want just the absolute, hold tight to those absolute narratives, and but I could see how they could kind of fall in love with this idea, because clearly the narrative is leading to the recorded narrative, but it's the positive, more well lit part of the story that goes untold, which is really interesting that you would pose it that way. But then the treatment itself, I'm going to just zoom in a little bit because it's new for me. Maybe you feel like you've done some things like this before, but in terms of like some of this background palette knife, it looks like on that sky. Mm-hmm. And then just kind of shape making with those distant trees, and then in the foreground, these trees are so I don't want to say roughly handled, but organically handled in a way that's not too finicky, and juxtapose that with how well the drapery's painted and the portrait hands, and even those aren't necessarily as hyper refined as I know you're capable of. Was that how did that play into thematically, or was it thematic? Was it just I want to try this out? What was the decision making there?
I mean, I tend to do. I like even in like my Haitian series, I kind of leaned that way, where my figures were more resolved, and then as you go into the background, it gets much more brushy and painterly, right? And that was what we were talking about before. My love of Sargent,
Yeah,
and my love of Serenite, paintings, but there's something nice about that really creates a sense of atmospheric perspective where things are hyper hyper realized, and then you fall into those juicy, beautiful brushstrokes of the background, and while being nice to look at, they also create that sense of atmosphere.
Yes, there's more suggested, and I think it mimics the way we naturally interact with nature. Where if I'm having a conversation with you, I'm looking at one of your eyes. That's very in focus. Everything from there kind of peripherally starts to diminish in its in how much I recognize it or register it. I don't, but when you're studying something. Or painting from life, or painting from a photo, or you've got some weeks, sometimes months on a work, you have an opportunity to overanalyze every aspect of it, and so the difficulty can sometimes be not over-explaining based on your ability to overanalyze, but still describing it in a way that mimics our natural interaction, where you have something that you are looking at, you are paying a little bit more attention to. Everything else kind of falls into that periphery, and so I think from a painting standpoint, it shows a certain mastery that you're forcing the viewer to look where you want them to look. You're kind of pulling the marionette strings on their attention and putting it exactly where you want it to be, which is brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. That's what I'm shooting for, and there's just something fun and satisfying about laying down a nice juicy palette knife or thick loaded brushstroke.
Yeah.
This tree was one I did a residency in France, and there was this beautiful olive tree. It was at the top of this hill. It was an old Greek temple that was in ruins, and it was just outside of it. It was an Olympia temple, and I went up and found that there and painted.
I should have been painting with you that year.
Yeah, I remember.
I'll always feel robbed. That was an experience I should have had with you.
Well, this is I did a little color study working out. And again, the Tondo idea, I love the Tondo idea.
Can you tilt that forward just a little bit? A little bit more. Yeah. A little bit more. More. There we go. Just getting some of that glare off. Cool.
But yeah, this is the study that I did before I did the larger.
And did you have a model for the study? How much is that from imagination?
So I had a model, but I also did one of these little maquettes, like this. I often do these little guys, where I work out the pose and what I want it to do, and then I'll have a model come and.
Is that just oil-based clay?
Yeah, and then I got just some paper towels, and I painted the paper towels the same color as the clay and then wrapped it around.